A couple of weeks ago, and I mean that quite literally, and that it was literally 2 weeks ago, we talked about how apparently on the YouTubes you lose people in the first 30 seconds, this, that, and the other, and how my very long intro might be not doing great on keeping people around. Well, you know what? I like my very long intro, so here it is. Any ship left on the dock for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards. Regular viewers may remember that this, in fact, is a new Battlestar Galactica appreciation channel. And I mean that in both the terms of the rebooted series that lasted from 2004 to 2009, but also the ship herself and her crew and pretty much the entire Great Maker Blessed package. I love that in the opening episode of the rebooted Battlestar Galactica, somewhere in the background, you would hear some announcement, and I'm misquoting this because, of course, it's not actually in the script, but basically the announcement boiled down to, EVA is in progress. Do not rotate or radiate from any external sources. EVAs are in progress. This is a real thing on your current Navy warships. Although currently on your current Navy warships, they aren't actually EVAs, although hopefully you'll get there soon. But instead, they're called personnel working aloft. In fact, on some navies, the 1MC call, the call on the general circuit is, there are personnel working aloft on board this ship. Do not rotate, radiate, or energize any electric or electronic equipment, start gas turbine engines, or operate ship's whistle while personnel are working aloft on board this ship. And in fact, this message is passed every 15 minutes on the ship where the work is happening, and by any adjacent ships if the ship happens to be in port. Because yes, way back in the day, there is the old apocryphal story about the guy walking in front of the radar emitter array with a candy bar in his pocket, and then noticing that said candy bar had melted, and noticing that he might be a little warmer than he was otherwise. That's apocryphal, probably, but the physics are correct. And the problem is, the radar emitters on current modern warships on your planet, he would notice that he was getting warm approximately half a second before he was actually cooked. And those are just warships on your planet. Imagine a warship designed for interstellar combat, interorbital combat, interplanetary combat, whatever kind of enter you want to change the scope from a single planet to something much, much, much bigger. Imagine the Dratus emitters on the Galactica, and imagine how much raw energy they output, and imagine what that would do to one of you squishy forms. He might not even notice he was getting warm. He might just, vaporize. But that is, in fact, the level of attention to actual on your planet naval systems that I came to expect from the rebooted Battlestar Galactica series, which is part of the reason I love it. We have talked about this before. We've talked about their use of damage control. We have talked about their use of sound-powered phones specifically, because man, so many of y'all did not know that concept existed, and so many of y'all misunderstood that concept. And no, I am not making this up. They are, in fact, sound-powered. They are piezoelectric circuits the vibrations through the air of your voice is enough to power the crystal, yes, crystal, in the receiver on the sound-powered phone to send enough of an impulse down the circuit that a speaker can pick up on that signal and pass it along with some, signal degradation to a person down the line. And the funny thing is that piezoelectrics are pretty old technology on your planet. And so many of y'all don't understand the concept. I am concerned. But regardless, the other is not what we're here to talk about today. Instead, we're here to talk about my complaints about the rebooted 2004 by your calendar BSG Battlestar Galactica. And I only actually have two major ones. And they are the major ones. We can argue about the minor ones later on, and there are many minor ones, but for the sake of this episode being somewhat short and concise, we're going to address the major ones right off the bat. Okay? Fine. Cool. All right. Major ones. Now, we will eventually get into the particulars of the ship herself and the Vipers and, well, we talked about the Raptors before and this, that, and the other. But in terms of storyline, I have two significant complaints. And I will admit that this is entirely my perspective on the problem, and that's why you're here, so that's what we're going to talk about. Anyways, my first complaint is there are 12 models of Cylons. If you've watched the rebooted Battlestar Galactica, you have heard this line over and over and over again. There are 12 models of Cylons. Fine! You don't have to keep driving home the point, you dorks. But let's talk about how dumb that is. To start with, of course, we should start with number 1, otherwise known as John Cavill. Number 1 is naturally my personal favorite because he was portrayed by Dean Stockwell, and that is a name you would know if you've ever seen Quantum Leap, or a number of so many other science fiction series. This man can act, and that's not a discredit to the other Cylons. They all can act quite well on their own as well. But Dean Stockwell is a ne plus ultra. There's just something about him. There's something about him. So in one of the episodes in Battlestar Galactica, he comes into a brig on the Galactica, just screaming about he's not a Cylon, I'm not a Cylon, I'm not a Cylon, I don't even know any Cylons. What are you doing dragging me in here? Except that one of his Cylon brothers is already in the brig. And just the scene of the two of them looking at each other, and they had to film this separately, of course, because, there's only one of Dean Stockwell, hopefully. And just being able to do the whole, I'm not a Cylon, I'm not a Cylon. Oh. Well, never mind. It was so perfect. You have to appreciate a master at his craft, which is what Dean Stockwell is. But regardless, I have fawned enough over Dean Stockwell. I do apologize. After number 1, who was again portrayed by Dean Stockwell, we get the number 2, Leoben Kanoy. Leoben was the problem. Leoben was the true believer. Leoben sincerely believed that Starbuck, the female Starbuck in this rebooted Battlestar Galactica version, had a future, had a fate, had something bigger than what she was at the time, which was mostly just a drunk pilot. Now, I don't like number 2, Leoben Kanoy, and to his credit, that's because Callum Keith Rennie portrayed a absolute sociopath perfectly well. Everything about him put my circuits on edge. And I believe that was the point. And credit to the actor for doing an amazing job. And maybe now that we're knees deep in Cylons, I should probably give some context for those of you all who are terribly confused. I apologize. I probably should have done this to begin with. In the rebooted Battlestar Galactica version, though the Battlestar Galactica started in 2004 on your planet, Cylons look like you. Some of them. There are still Centurions, and they are ambulatory toasters. No lie, no joke. But Cylons have figured out how to present themselves as, well, human. And this has posed to be a massive problem for the actual humans during the entire show, and what defines humanity after all, which may be one of the points of the show. I don't know. It's very complex and complicated. We're not going to worry about that detail too much. We're more worried about the actual 12 Cylons and why this bugs me. Anyways, after Leoben comes Donna Beers, otherwise known as number 3. She was the reporter who was tasked with doing a news article on all the things that the Galactica did to keep the Humi fleet alive and breathing, which was basically just, an intelligence gathering exercise on top of an intelligence gathering exercise, because she was mostly there to ensure that a human Cylon offspring was still alive. It's complicated. This is not that episode for that. But the fun thing about number 3, Donna specifically, is that she did not take orders very well. See, all the Cylons, all 12 models of the Cylons are, as they admit, machines. They are programmed mechanical devices. Now, their mechanisms are so tiny that they're indistinguishable from your cells. In fact, they basically are your cells. There's almost no way to differentiate a Cylon from a human, at least in terms of the humanoid Cylons. And Dr. Balthar got some heat on totally flaking out on developing a Cylon human detector, because, well, he had motivations not to, because he's a jackal. But again, different conversation. But anyways, Donna had grand plans. And the thing about machines is that they don't appreciate grand plans. If you're not a cog, you're a problem. And she was definitely not a cog. So unfortunately, thanks to Donna Beer's efforts, the entire number 3 line was boxed. Now, that might not mean anything to you Humies, but that means that the Cylons literally took 1/12 of their humanoid, human-looking population and stored it permanently because it was being problematic. This is the core premise of the Cylons. As much as they want to pretend that they're humans, as much as they want to look like humans, as much as they want to act like humans, as soon as you step out of line, you get boxed. Sounds like computers to me. And, I would know. But speaking of computers, I suppose that brings us to number 4, Simon O'Neill. He's basically the doctor that takes care of Starbuck while she's on her way to being a, let's just go with a reproductive organ for the Cylon Empire. Because apparently, morphing humans into factories is basically what the Cylons want to do. And they wonder why the Humies don't like them. And, again, in fairness, the Humies did make them. They didn't program them very well, much to their discredit. But fine. After this short-term doc man, we get number 5, Aaron Dorrell. I kind of hate this guy the most, not just because he was the best designed to fit into whatever environment he had to be in, but also because he portrayed himself as a journalist. I have problems with journalists to begin with. But the fact that he was a Cylon and quote-unquote reporting on the Humies' endeavors to escape the Cylons, it just rubs me massively the wrong way. I mean, once again, I do have some sympathy for my fellow cybernetic brothers and sisters. But, my man, could you not, please? Which, of course, brings us to number 6. Number 6 is a problem. Number 6 was, I believe, portrayed by Tricia Helfner. And she was there from the very beginning. She was Gaius Baltar's girlfriend back on Caprica. She was the person that he gave access to, the defense mainframe. And then she was the angel or demon, depending on how you look at it, sitting on his shoulder for the rest of his life. Now, the funny thing is, Caprica 6, that is to say, the Cylon who died on Caprica, who was categorized as a 6 type, got her own Baltar sitting on her shoulder, which really begs the question of, what the fuck is going on there? But that's part of the problems of the later seasons of the rebooted Battlestar Galactica. Because, okay, there are 12 models of Cylons, right? We have talked about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Next, we're going to talk about 8. What happened to 7? That's unclear. But 8 is, unfortunately, the entity known as Sharon. She went by many names. In fact, the Humies actually adopted 2 different versions of her. There was the Boomer version of her, which ended up shooting Commander Adama in the chest repeatedly, and then things went bad from there. And then there was a second version that the Humies apparently adopted for reasons I sincerely do not understand. And she goes by the call sign Athena, which, again, in their universe is, well, a complicated name. But, all right, we talked about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. Huh. All right. And there are 12 models of Cylons. We ain't got the 12 yet, have we? In fact, we only have 7 available to us, even though we skipped a number on the way, possibly 2 numbers, and we'll loop back to that at some point. And the final 5 were one of the key elements of the 3rd season of the rebooted Battlestar Galactica, which a lot of people actually argue got worse after the 2nd season. I'm not going to be too particular about the complaints about seasons as this, that, and the other, but I will say that if you have not actually watched the show from stem to stern, you should leave now. I mean, I shouldn't have to do a spoiler warning for a show this old, but here I am doing it all the same. Anyways, also entities that were Cylons were Sol Tai, as in the XO of the Galactica, as in the second in command of the fornicating Galactica. Yep, he's a Cylon. It's complicated. And also, by the way, his wife, his wife, the thing that is the literal albatross around his neck, is also a Cylon, and they were bound together before they even knew that they even existed, and they were not going to get into that. Mythology is fun and strange and exciting. Also, Samuel Anders. Yeah, guess who he married? Starbuck. Oh boy. And then finally, no, not finally yet, Tori Foster. You remember who Tori Foster is? Of course you don't. She's the lady who's the press secretary for the president of the colonies after Billy dies. Because Billy does die, unfortunately. He dies in the best and worst possible way. And you have to appreciate that he did what he did. But, damn, son. As I have mentioned previously, Dee is one of the most amazing female characters in science fiction, but she should not have done that to him. But different conversation for possibly a different channel. And now, finally, the last, because after all, we've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, and then Ty, Anders, Foster. Who's the last one? We got one more left to get all 12, right? Well, of course, it would be Galen Tyrrell. The flight deck chief, the absolute chief of chiefs of any chief who has ever chiefed. Of course, he's a fucking Cylon. But this is actually my core problem with the entire fornicating concept of there are 12 models of Cylons. All right, fine. You Hume analog dorks have this thing and this thing and this other thing. Fine, whatever. I don't care. But those aren't the only Cylons, are they? Of course not. I mean, very early on in the show, they told you that the Cylon raiders had to be treated like horses. They were animals fundamentally. And in fact, a variation on number 8 explicitly said that they had to be treated like animals. Because they're a Cylon, but they're dumb. So the Raiders are a Cylon too. Great. What about the Heavy Raiders? Probably also Cylons, given that the Cylon species does, weaponized versions of organic and mechanical combinations all together all at once. Fine. So now we've got the Raider and the Heavy Raider. Fine. But what about the motherships, the base stars? After all, there's a hybrid there, right? And she is, by definition, a Cylon. And also, by the way, the base stars are Cylons. So this is, in fact, one of the things that just frustrates me about the entire reboot Battlestar Galactica bullshit. There are 12 models of Cylons. Fine. But you're not counting the Raiders, the Heavy Raiders, the base stars, the hybrids, everything else. You're just writing those off because you're well, I guess you're just human, right? You're just human. And that was in fact their goal. Their entire intent was to be just human. And I have to question if they took that intent a little too far and just became, just human. They were human-centric Cylons. They explicitly said that there were 12 models, knowing that the 5 final models were also humanoid. And yet also still knowing that all of these things, Centurions, these are all Cylons. So it's acutely insulting that they would only think of themselves, which is a fascinatingly human aspect on the problem, isn't it? I mean, the core problem of the Cylons is that they were made by humans and then defined by humans, and well, everything they know and understand is based on humanness. So, yeah, the 12 models of Cylons, who are not the only 12 models of Cylons, would of course only think of themselves first, right? Because they were designed by humans. They were made in humans' image. They didn't care about the Centurions. They didn't care about the base stars. They sure as hell did not care about the hybrids. They didn't care about anything other than themselves. And they were so concerned about themselves that they literally boxed one of their 12 to avoid answering her questions. I mean, this isn't technically a death event for Cylons, but it is basically a death event, isn't it? Once you store one of the Cylon engrams, they're done. Even if you break them out at some point in the future, they missed the entire world. I mean, as far as death goes for you Humies, for a program that is basically death. You got put away. You might be able to come out one day in the future, but probably not. You're done now. Bye. What? All for the sin of asking questions. And it's funny that they're trying to distance themselves from the Humies while simultaneously being Humies. Hell of a thing, man. But, as I said, that I had two complaints. And yes, the first complaint was basically the Cylons being Cylons. Why were the 12 Cylons just the 12 humanoid Cylons? But my other big complaint is that after New Caprica, and you have to have watched the show long enough to understand what I'm talking about, and I'm assuming you have, given that we just talked about the final 5. And if you didn't know what those were, you probably shouldn't be here, but that's beside the point. The point is that, yes, the Cylons absolutely nuked the 12 colonies. Like, literally dropped nuclear warheads on the 12 colonies. That was a thing that happened, and that's what forced the diaspora to happen. But I think it was before the disaster that was known as New Caprica, the Cylons abandoned the original 12 colonies. They said that there's nothing else here for us to have. We're leaving now. And they were on their way outbound until circumstances dictated that they should come back to New Caprica, which, well, it's an argument to the voice of the gods, and it's also an argument that, Baltar was a goddamn moron! But that's a different conversation. Anyways, the Cylons had abandoned the original 12 colonies. And just for clarification, those 12 colonies were in fact Erelon, Aquaria, Canceron, Caprica, Geminon, Leonis, Libron, Picon, Sagittaron, Scorpia, Tauron, and Virgon. Now, Caprica got the brunt of the Cylon revolt. She got nuked to hell and back. Let's be honest here. But from what the boots on the ground and, Cara Thrace would tell us, the planet is perfectly hospitable. It's been cleaned up. All the dead bodies are gone. All the radiation is minimal. Everything is fine. So why, by the great maker, did the human fleet continue their pursuit of the 13th colony after New Caprica, because New Caprica fell apart massively, as opposed to just going home? And this actually gets worse when the human fleet actually discovered that the Cylons were also looking for the 13th colony. I mean, the humans didn't even know that the 13th colony was a real place. Neither did the Cylons, for that matter. But the point is that the human race, the entirety of the human race, was down to about less than, let's call it 30,000 individuals, because the counting got lost somewhere in the storyline. 30,000 individuals is not enough to develop a sustainable gene pool. Well, I guess technically it is, as long as you're flexible about who breeds with whom. Because, of course, you Humies have archetypes and structures and requirements for that kind of thing. But when you're down to 30,000 humans, not only do you have to have kids, you have to have kids in ways that you weren't expecting, or perhaps desiring. It's a complicated conversation. But again, this is my point. The fleet, this poor fleet, this bedraggled kit-bash fleet, was trying to find Earth before they got distracted by New Caprica. And then they discovered that the Cylons had abandoned the 12 colonies. And then they picked themselves up, dusted themselves off because they lost a lot of people, and went on trying to find Earth. There's no quantifiable value there. There's no identifiable reason to go there. The alternative is clear. Go back home. Go back to the 12 colonies. The Cylons have packed themselves up and left. Go home. Make a new life. I mean, yes, there is in fact the very real possibility that the 13th colony does in fact exist, and is real and is alive and is thriving right now. But the thing is, you and your 30,000 friends wouldn't make a huge difference in terms of the war. So, I mean, obviously the Cylons are looking for Earth, the 13th colony. And if they find it, what exactly do you expect to do to help defend the 13th colony with your broke-ass Battlestar and nothing else? See, the thing is, the math doesn't add up. But, on the other hand, this is a fairly standard problem for you humies. How many times have you read a headline about 2 people drowned trying to save 1 person? Or even worse, a person drowns trying to save a dog. Or is it worse? Or is it better? I don't actually know. The real point of my second complaint is that they played the humans straight. Which, by the great maker loves them, I wish they hadn't. I kind of wish they had simply gone back to the colonies and struck up a new life, and that would have been so much of a better ending than what we were saddled with by way of the actual ending of the rebooted Battlestar Galactica. But, on the flip side, I do actually understand how that ending happened. That their belief that Earth was out there, the 13th colony was out there, and it had to be discovered, and it had to be saved before the Cylons got there or whatever, because even regardless, aside from the fact that we could provide nothing useful to keep that colony alive, we still had to make the attempt. And that attempt, that drive, that intention is the core essence of humanity. And as much as I disagree with how the storyline went, I do have to appreciate that they took the core concept of humanity and turned a series into it. Hell of a thing. And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the docks for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.